how often does that inner critic, pipe up? The one that's super quick to point out flaws or keeps replaying mistakes, leaving you with that nagging feeling that maybe you're just not quite cutting it.
Yeah, that's a really common thing, isn't it? Getting caught in those negative thought spirals, feeling like you're not enough.
It really is. But what if there's another way? A different approach to dealing with all that internal noise?
Exactly.
Today on the Deep Dive, we're going to explore something called self-acceptance, a perhaps more liberating way to look at things.
That's right. And we've gathered some really interesting resources to unpack this. We'll be looking at discussions from places like Reddit's self-improvement community.
Okay.
Some very practical advice from the Center for Clinical Interventions, a great overview from BetterUp, and even some pretty compelling findings from a study in psychosomatic medicine.
So quite a range. Our goal today is pretty straightforward, really. We want to give you some actionable insights, maybe a fresh perspective on how you relate to yourself.
Yeah, hopefully with a bit more kindness, more understanding, which ultimately helps your overall well-being, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so self-acceptance. Let's nail down what we actually mean by that in practical terms.
Well, BetterUp defines it pretty clearly. At its core, self-acceptance is really about fully embracing yourself, like all the different parts of your personality, just as they are.
Okay, the good and the bad.
Exactly. The positive traits, the ones you find maybe more challenging, your physical self, your mental state, everything. But crucially, without that constant harsh judgment or self-criticism.
Right.
It's about valuing your inherent worth, separate from what happens externally or what you achieve.
So it's like this foundational sense of being okay with yourself, even when things aren't perfect. I remember reading in that CNET article, it made a useful distinction between self-acceptance and self-esteem. Can you unpack that a bit?
Yeah, that's a really key point CNET makes. Self-acceptance, it tends to be more stable, more consistent. It's like a neutral state of just being okay with you.
Yeah.
Self-esteem, though, that can fluctuate a lot more. It can go up and down based on like external events, and it directly impacts your mood.
So like if you mess up at work.
Right. With self-acceptance, you can accept you made a mistake on that project maybe, without it completely destroying your whole sense of self-worth.
Ah, I see. It acts like a buffer then.
Exactly. It's that buffer.
That makes sense. Self-acceptance is the deeper thing, more resilient. And CNET also listed some key characteristics, didn't they? Things that often go along with self-acceptance.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Things like being able to see your faults but still be okay with them,
Right.
having a basic respect for yourself,
Right.
championing yourself without always needing approval from others, seeing negative traits as just part of the whole picture of you.
Not the whole picture.
Precisely. And understanding your overall worth isn't just tied to one single good or bad thing about you.
Okay, so we're getting a clearer picture of what it is. But why is it so important? Why should we actively try to cultivate this? BetterUp had some thoughts on this, right?
They really did. BetterUp basically says self-acceptance is the foundation, the groundwork for personal growth and emotional well-being.
The foundation. How so?
Well, when you have that base of accepting yourself, it sort of creates this psychological safety net. It lets you look at areas where you want to improve, but without immediately jumping to harsh self-criticism.
Ah, so it's less judgment, more observation.
Kind of.
Yeah.
It's like having a supportive coach in your head instead of a drill sergeant constantly shouting at you.
That's a useful analogy, because yeah, if you always tearing yourself down, it's hard to find the energy or motivation to actually change things.
Exactly. And when you do make progress or notice your good qualities, self-acceptance lets you actually take that in, absorb those wins, which then builds your confidence and resilience for the next challenge.
Okay.
It also changes how you approach your, let's say, shortcomings. Instead of anger or shame, you can approach them with more kindness, maybe curiosity, which makes real growth feel more possible, more sustainable. Ultimately, this helps foster, inner peace, better emotional intelligence. It just equips you better for life's ups and downs.
It sounds like the flip side, then, not having much self-acceptance could be pretty detrimental. BetterUp mentioned that too.
It really can be. They point out that constantly struggling with self-acceptance might actually impact the amygdala, that's the emotion center in the brain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, potentially leading to more emotional imbalance, maybe finding it harder to regulate feelings. And, well, if you're always focused on the negatives, it really puts a cap on your happiness and psychological well-being. It's like wearing negativity goggles all the time.
Right, filtering everything through that lens. Okay, so let's flip the script again. What are the good things, the tangible benefits, if we do manage to cultivate more self-acceptance? Better Up listed quite a few.
Oh, definitely. Higher self-acceptance is linked to a whole range of positive stuff.
Yeah.
Better Up mentions things like just experiencing more positive emotions, generally a greater sense of psychological well-being.
So feeling better overall.
Yeah, can boost your mood and even act as a kind of shield against stress and depression symptoms. And Dr. Srini Pillai, who Better Up referenced, has this interesting take on how self-acceptance is crucial for self-forgiveness. It helps bridge that gap, between the part of you that needs forgiving and the part that needs to do the forgiving.
That internal bridge that really lands, that inner conflict we feel sometimes.
It does, doesn't it? There's more. Better self-acceptance often leads to more self-confidence.
Right.
Makes you more willing to step out of your comfort zone, try things even if you're scared. And it changes how you see failure.
How so?
Yes, like a personal indictment, I'm a failure, and more like, okay, that didn't work, what can I learn? An opportunity for growth.
That's a big shift.
Huge.
Yeah.
And crucially, it fosters self-compassion. Kristin Neff's work, which Better Up also highlights, is really important here.
Self-compassion. Treating yourself like a friend.
Exactly like you'd treat a good friend who's struggling. Neff's research suggests this kindness toward yourself is actually maybe more important for well-being than just having high self-esteem.
Interesting. So less focus on feeling good about yourself, more on being kind to yourself, especially when things are tough.
Precisely. And one last thing from Better Up. When you truly accept yourself, you're less dependent on what others think.
Freedom from external validation.
Yeah, it lets you be more authentic, your real self, without that constant worry about judgment, which can be absolutely draining.
Okay, this paints a really strong case for why self-acceptance matters so much, not just a fluffy idea.
Not at all. It's fundamental.
Right. Let's get practical then. Strategies. I was really struck by something simple from that Reddit thread, just saying, it's okay to yourself. Seems almost too basic.
It does seem basic, but don't underestimate it. That little phrase can be incredibly powerful. The Reddit discussion really highlighted how saying it's okay, when you notice you're being hard on yourself or feeling angry or replaying something awkward, it can actually interrupt those negative loops, kind of defuse those intrusive thoughts.
But how does something so simple work against those really ingrained patterns?
Well, it works by acknowledging what's happening right now, your current feeling, how your brain is operating in that moment. Our brains are wired for survival, right? And sometimes that means defaulting to negative patterns based on past stuff or perceived threats. The person on Reddit made a great point. We're all just doing our best with the brain wiring we have.
Right.
Piling on self-criticism for having those feelings actually just makes them stronger. Saying it's okay is like acknowledging reality without judgment.
So it's not saying the feeling is good, just that it is.
Exactly. It's not about condoning or giving up. It creates a pause, a moment of acceptance of what is. And that acceptance, surprisingly, is often the first step needed to actually shift things. Fighting the feeling just digs it in deeper.
That's a fantastic reframe. Acceptance as the starting point, not the end point. Okay, let's get even more concrete. The Center for Clinical Interventions, CCI, they had some really practical tools, right? Starting with noticing the positives.
Yes, CCI points out that when self-esteem is low, we naturally zoom in on flaws and failures and kind of ignore or dismiss the good stuff.
Guilty as charged.
Yeah, most of us are. So they suggest creating a positive qualities record or a positive you journal. Basically making a dedicated effort to list your good characteristics, strengths, talents, achievements, things you feel good about.
And they had specific tips for making that work, didn't they? Because just thinking about it isn't always enough.
Spot on, CCI says.
Yeah.
Set aside specific time. Actually write it down. Don't just keep it in your head. Brainstorm like crazy. Get everything out. Don't censor.
Okay.
Maybe even ask trusted friends or family for input. Sometimes they see strengths we miss in ourselves. And this is important. Watch out for discounting the positive.
Like saying, oh, that was just luck, or anyone could do that.
Exactly. Challenge those dismissals.
Yeah.
And finally, reread the list regularly. Let it sink in. Really absorb it. It helps reshape that self-perception over time.
And this journal, it wasn't just listing qualities, right? It involved examples, past and present.
Precisely. 2 parts. Part 1. Recall specific past examples for each positive quality. So not just, I'm kind, but I remember when I helped my neighbor carry their groceries last week. Makes it concrete, real.
Wow, provides evidence.
Yeah. Then part 2 shifts to the present. The idea is to note down like maybe 3 specific things you did that day that demonstrated those positive qualities.
Okay, so it keeps it active, relevant to now.
Right. It reinforces that these qualities aren't just historical facts, they're part of who you are, how you act day to day.
I like that, making it an ongoing practice. CCI also talked about acting like the positive you. What was that about?
This connects thoughts to behavior. How do you treat yourself when you're feeling down?
Probably not great. Maybe neglect things, skip fun stuff.
Exactly. CCI points out that negative self-view often leads to self-neglect or withdrawing. So this step is about consciously flipping that.
Yeah.
Act like someone deserving of good experiences, fun, achievement.
How? By forcing yourself to do things.
Kind of, yeah. By intentionally planning activities, things you enjoy, things that give you a sense of accomplishment, maybe even drag them on a schedule. See how they affect your mood. The key is starting small. Achievable tasks. Break big things down. Focus on just doing it, not necessarily how much you do it first. It's about challenging that feeling of being undeserving.
Those are some really solid, actionable steps from CCI. Now, Better Up also had more exercises, didn't they? Beyond journaling.
Yes, quite a few useful techniques. Gratitude practice is a big one.
Right, listing things you're grateful for.
Yeah, consciously writing down, say, 3 to 5 things each day. It genuinely helps retrain your brain to scan for the positive. You start noticing silver linings, appreciating small things, maybe even finding gratitude within perceived flaws.
Actively training your brain's focus. I like that.
Exactly. Another one Better Up suggests is reframing negative thoughts.
How does that work?
First, you identify and write down a negative belief you have. Then you challenge it like, is this really 100% true? Look at the evidence.
Okay.
Then, you consciously replace it with something more balanced, realistic, and kinder. Better Up's example was good instead of, I'm a failure because I didn't get the promotion.
Yeah.
Shift to something like, I'm capable, I didn't get this role, maybe other factors were involved, I can learn from this and keep going.
That subtle shift in the internal script, it can make a huge difference over time. What else did Better Up suggest?
They also talked about your support system. Really important. Consciously identifying who lifts you up and who brings you down.
And trying to spend more time with the positive influences.
Right. And maybe less with the negative ones, if possible.
Sure.
They also recommended regular meditation.
To detach from the negative self-talk.
Yeah, it helps you observe thoughts without getting swept away by them, improves mood, promotes inner peace. And finally, they mentioned actively practicing self-forgiveness. They even had an exercise for it.
Okay, lots of tools there. And CNET chimed in with a few more tips too, if I recall.
They did. CNET mentioned mindfulness again, suggesting guided meditation apps if sitting in silence is hard. Helps quiet the chatter, focus on acceptance and self-love.
Good practical tip.
They also echoed the importance of self-compassion, being kind to yourself when you stumble, because, you will. It's a journey.
Definitely.
And lastly, that active process again. Challenge negative thoughts as they arise. Stop them. Replace them with something positive, even if you don't fully buy it initially.
Planting seeds.
Exactly. Planting those positive seeds.
So we've got a pretty comprehensive toolbox now. Switching gears slightly, I found that Midas study connecting self-acceptance and mortality risk fascinating. And maybe a bit startling. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, that study looked at the long-term effects of adverse childhood experiences, ACEs.
Things like abuse, instability, hardship in childhood.
Right. A whole range of tough early experiences. They investigated if these ACEs were linked to dying earlier in adulthood. And then, crucially, whether things like self-acceptance or purpose in life might explain how that link works.
Okay, so what did they find? Is there a link between ACEs and mortality?
Yes, they confirmed that link. More ACEs were associated with a higher risk of mortality later on. But the really interesting part was that self-acceptance seemed to account for about 15% of that relationship.
15%, wow.
Yeah. It suggests that maybe experiencing childhood adversity can lead to lower self-acceptance in adulthood, and that lower self-acceptance in turn contributes to the increased mortality risk. Purpose in life also played a role, but smaller, around 4%.
So it's not just about feeling bad. Lower self-acceptance could actually have real physical health consequences down the line. That's powerful.
It really is. The conclusion was basically that the impact of ACEs might partly travel through this pathway of reduced self-acceptance, which makes self-acceptance a potential target for interventions to improve long-term health, especially for those with difficult childhoods.
This leads us nicely to that distinction Kristen Neff makes, the one in the PMC article, between self-compassion and self-esteem. It sounds like focusing on self-compassion might be healthier than just chasing high self-esteem.
That's a really key insight from Neff's work. She argues self-compassion is more sustainable, more emotionally resilient. Her model has three main parts.
Okay.
Self-kindness, being warm and understanding toward yourself, not judgmental. Common humanity, recognizing that suffering and imperfection are shared human experiences. You're not alone.
And mindfulness, being aware of negative feelings without getting totally overwhelmed or identifying with them.
So acknowledging the tough stuff, but with kindness and perspective, knowing others feel it too.
Exactly. And Neff points out, while high self-esteem feels good and is linked to less depression and anxiety, it can have downsides.
Like, it can depend on external success, comparing yourself to others, sometimes even narcissism. Self-compassion, though, seems linked to things like happiness, optimism, curiosity, feeling connected, as well as fewer negative emotions. And importantly, it doesn't kill your motivation. People high in self-compassion are often more likely to admit mistakes and learn from them